As we continue our little journey south down 6th Street, the next place we want to look at is the Museum of Arts and History. To many of us, it's a place to go and find out more about the history of the city of Port Huron. But to those of us of a certain age, basically my age, we remember this building as the public library. I remember as a boy walking into this building that seemed really more like a church than it did a library. It was always so quiet, you almost felt a sense of reverence as you walked in. The silent code was really enforced back in those days. And as you walked in, you found that beautiful counter right in front of you. I haven't been in this building since it became a museum, and perhaps that counter is still there, but it always kind of impressed me. And then as we walked around to get to the second floor, there was that spiral staircase that always intrigued me because the floor above it, at least above my head, was like glass. It was a frosted glass. You couldn't see through it. But it was so unique. It was always fun walking up that spiral staircase. Now that I think of it, I think that staircase perhaps went to a mezzanine of some sort because the staircase to the second floor was right near the entrance. It's been over a half a century, so sometimes my memory gets a little bit foggy on those issues. There were no computers in the library back then in those days because there was no computers. If you wanted to find a book, you went to the card catalog. You pulled out one of these drawers, you'd look through the section that would apply to the book you're looking for, and it would give you a number, and then you would try to find the book in the library. Quite a bit different than how you find a book today. This system was called the Dewey System. It was named after the gentleman that you see here named Melville Dewey. The Dewey Decimal Classification System has been used in the United States Library since the 1870s when Melville Dewey developed it and put his name on it. He once said this: "A library's function to give the public in the quickest and cheapest way information, inspiration, and recreation. For better way than the book can be found, we should use it." The Dewey classification system is still used in 96% of the libraries in the United States today. You just don't have to pull out a card drawer and look up through the different cards to find it. You just go to your computer and find it, and that gives you the Dewey number where to find it in the library. And if you're an observant person and took the time to read the sign that's in front of the Port Huron Museum today that refers to when the building was a Port Huron library, you'd know this. At its dedication in 1904, New York State librarian Melville Dewey, creator of the book classification system that bears his name, delivered the opening address. So you can see that Mr. Dewey had a connection to the city of Port Huron. There's another man that had a connection to Port Huron, specifically this library, without whose help this library never would have been built. That is Andrew Carnegie. Andrew Carnegie was a Scottish-American industrialist. Carnegie led the expansion of the American steel industry in the late 19th century, and is often identified as one of the richest people ever. In today's dollars, Andrew Carnegie's worth would be about $309 billion, that's with a B. And think what that money could have bought you back in the 1800s, in the $1,800. So the man definitely wasn't hurting for money. He had a little change in his pocket for sure. Andrew Carnegie's philanthropy began around 1870. Although he supported many projects and causes, he's best known for his gifts of free public library buildings, beginning in his native Scotland and ultimately extending throughout the English-speaking world, including the United States, United Kingdom, Australia, and New Zealand. The photograph you've been looking at is the first library that Carnegie ever donated to a city, and this was in his hometown in Scotland. In 1887, Carnegie married Louise Whitfield of New York City. He was 21 years older than she was. and they signed a prenuptial marriage agreement stating that Carnegie's intention of giving away virtually his entire fortune during his lifetime. 2 years later, he wrote the Gospel of Wealth, which boldly articulated his view of the rich as trustees of their wealth and should live without extravagance, provide moderately for their families, and use their riches to promote the welfare and happiness of others. This statement of his philosophy was read all over the world, and Carnegie's intentions were widely praised. It is said that Carnegie had two main reasons for supporting libraries. First, he believed that in America, anyone with access to books and the desire to learn could educate him or herself and be successful, as he had been. Second, Carnegie, an immigrant, felt America's newcomers needed to acquire cultural knowledge of the country, which a library would help make possible. Carnegie indicated it was the first reason that mattered most to him. Growing up working long hours in Pittsburgh, he had no access to formal education. However, a retired merchant, Colonel Anderson, loaned books from a small library to local boys, including Carnegie. As he later wrote in praise of Anderson, "This is but a slight tribute and gives only a faint idea of the depths of gratitude which I feel for what he did for me and my companions. It was from my own early experiences that I decided there was no use to which money could be applied so productive of good to boys and girls who have good within them and ability and ambition to develop it, as the founding of a public library in a community." This monument stands in front of the hall and library in the Diamond Square in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. In the very early 1900s, a new library commission was formed consisting of 3 men, and they would have made application to the Carnegie Foundation for a new library in the city of Port Huron. And that application would have looked very much like this application right here. In 1902, the city of Port Huron secured money from Carnegie to erect a municipal library. 2 years later, this grand, beautiful building was completed at a cost of $45,000. Chicago architects Patton and Miller designed the Indiana limestone-clad building. Originally, Carnegie agreed to give the city $40,000 for the library, but subsequently it was increased to $45,000. With the usual conditions that the city provide a site and agree to a yearly sum appropriate for its maintenance, a sum not less than 10% of the gift, which in this case would be $4,500. After this was accepted by the city, there was some difficulty in selecting a location. But fortunately, the Second Ward Park was chosen, and the following year the building was begun and completed in 1905. The Second Ward Park was the block that the library would be built in. At the time of the building, the only other structure there was the First Washington School on 7th Street, just behind the library. And you can see in this photograph, it looks like a pretty nice place. At least the dog on the sidewalk thinks it is. The Port Huron Public Library served in its original capacity for over 60 years. In 1967, a larger public library was constructed. The following year, the former library opened as the Port Huron Museum of Arts and History. That pretty much covers the public library at this location, but what about before this? Have there always been public libraries in Port Huron? Well, I'm so glad you asked that question, and here's the answer. There was a public library before this one, the location we've been looking at, and not too far from here. It was over on Pine Street between Military and 6th Street. And this was the old Universal Church. And the church had moved on and the building was empty, and so the public library took over residence there. You can't tell from this photograph, but in this particular photograph you can. It was a pretty nice looking building. But before that, there was the city library, and that was located in this high school building right here. This is the same location where St. Clair Community College is now. In 1865, 6 ladies met in a small room in the basement of the old Methodist church. They used to sit on the corner of 6th and Water Street, just across the street from where the Customs building is today. The purpose of this meeting was to unite their efforts in forming a Ladies' Library Association. The first president of the group was Helen Wheaton Theron. The organization provided women with a chance to meet outside the home and to develop their intellect. Rigorous library exercises, which entailed reading, writing, and discussion, were conducted every Saturday. The Ladies' Library Association also hosted lectures, international spelling bees, concerts, and plays in an effort to improve the cultural life of the city. The very first book in the library was the gift of one of its members, and it was entitled Chronicles of the Middle Ages. And the author was a French fellow by the name of Froissart, which is shown here, or at least a statue. Seemed like pretty heavy reading for these ladies, but maybe they enjoyed it. Actually, the first 27 books were donations. The first purchase of books numbered 86, so that in September of 1866, there were 113 volumes in the library cupboard, duly labeled, and many of them drawn and read each week. After its second year of existence, the Ladies' Library Association membership had grown from 14 to 51, and this library had swelled from 27 donated books to 320 selected volumes. Some of the ladies formed a cyclopedia group that did different events to raise money so they could purchase the Encyclopedia Set Britannica. This would have been today's equivalent of Google. It made a tremendous addition to their library. The ones you're seeing here are first and second editions of that encyclopedia group. The number swelled to 1,596 in 1872. Eventually, their inventory of books exceeded 5,000. You can also see from this document that the Ladies' Library Association was being established all throughout the state of Michigan. Many of these books were received from Washington, D.C. through the efforts of Senator Omar Conger. There are many valuable public documents and state papers that Mr. Conger also donated to the Library Association. With all these books, they needed more room. Of course, they started off in the basement of the church. They went to ladies' homes from there. They went to an office just south of the bridge. They went to a lawyer's office, and he said it could be free of charge as long as they supplied the wood for the stove. But eventually, one of the members passed away and left $1,000 for the building fund, and they eventually built a building in the 1100 block of Military Street. This would not be the building, but it would be in this location. We don't have a picture of that building, but we do have this, which is actually a sketch from the inside of the building looking out on Military Street. The Kalamazoo Ladies' Library Association was the very first one in the state of Michigan. And I think when they built their building here in Port Huron, they probably used that as a pattern for what they wanted. And if that was so, then this is what it looked like, or at least similar. By the 1890s, the Ladies' Library Association had broadened its scope to encompass the study of current events, especially the issue of women's rights. Young turn-of-the-century women confronted a changing world with much greater choices than their predecessors. The Ladies' Library Association got people interested in reading books, and it became a popular pastime. And pretty soon there were public libraries. Most of them at that time were in schools, quite often a high school. The Ladies' Library Association and the public libraries coexisted for a while, and then pretty much they died out and the public libraries took over. But that's how it all started. Kind of like today with the ladies' book clubs. What goes around comes around, I guess. So the next time you enter the Port Huron Museum, think about when it was the Port Huron Library and all the history that's connected to it. Join me in my next video and we'll mosey a little further down 6th Street and see what else there is to see.